Hi, it's Dwyer, keepingitfree.blogspot.com. I think it's important in an election year in which all of the focus is on the two major party candidates that other voices be heard. Now, I'm not a supporter of either candidate. Neither of these candidates is addressing even remotely my concerns. I believe the biggest issue in this election concerns civil liberties. The taking of power away from the people by a government so poorly run that it has a $16 trillion deficit, right? The entire idea of the indefinite detention of American citizens should worry all Americans, especially since that's the position that both of these candidates support, right? Whether it's the war on terror or whether it's some other war. And we know from history that unfortunately once the government takes power, it's very hard to wrestle it back from the government, right? The idea that any American citizen, no matter how notorious, can be indefinitely detained without even being charged, I would argue, runs against the entire concept of our country. Right? Let's go one step further. The idea of warrantless wiretaps and the other canards of the Patriot Act should have all of us worried. More troubling is the fact that we now have the concept of government mandates in a free society, where the government is telling you that you aren't free enough to be uninvolved in buying healthcare insurance, right? Unfortunately, once the legality of government mandates has been upheld, as it has been, so it's a scary time in America. You and I know that government mandates are going to jump the fence. They're going to go from being just in healthcare to other parts of our society, right? These are big issues. I just watched the Republican National Convention. They couldn't even take head on the idea of government mandates. I don't want just another healthcare program from another candidate. I want the repudiation of the entire concept that government has the power to issue government mandates whenever it wants to finance one of its pet projects, right? It's not enough to repeal Obamacare. We need to somehow pass laws that prohibit the United States government from issuing Obamacare type mandates. Now let's talk about these two parties and the idea of a budget. And I say the idea of a budget because right now, of course, in the United States, we don't have a budget. President Obama has not been able to get a budget through Congress for several years. And it's glaring because, of course, for the first 2 years of the Obama presidency, the Democrats had the majority in both the House and Senate. They still have the majority in the Senate. Obama can't even get a budget through the Senate. So, fiscally, the Democrats are a no-budget mess. Let's talk about the Republicans. Paul Ryan's supposed to be a game changer. The Ryan plan doesn't balance the budget for 30 years. My advice to you, if you're a shareholder and the directors tell you and corporate management tell you that they aren't going to balance the budget for 30 years, my advice is that you sell your shares and get out. Understand That's what a lot of bondholders are doing with regard to U.S. bonds. Now, the most important moment, in my opinion, the most meaningful moment at the recent Republican National Convention was in its most maligned speech. It was when Clint Eastwood directly said to the American people, "You own the country." That's what we need to remember at all times. We don't need to settle for a president who can't even get a budget through a Democratic Senate. We don't need to settle for a president who passes nonsense bills like cash for clunkers that cost the American people more than $20,000 a car. In fact, much more, depending on some reports. Right? We don't need to settle for a president who opposes gay marriage until an election year, and even then offers no federal legislation to make it law. We don't need a president who can't even mention black unemployment in excess of 14% for whatever reason, whether it's because of a campaign strategy, whether it's because to hide his own failure to author any bills whatsoever that address minority unemployment, which right now is at depression levels, right? It's at crisis levels. If white unemployment were this high, it would be issue 1, right? Somehow black unemployment is being pushed to the back of the bus, right? Forget the labels. Look at the reality. We don't need to settle for a president who presided over a record number of deportations. And then, of course, during an election year, changes his tune and issues an executive order that is so tepid that it applies to only some young immigrants and, of course, places them in legal limbo. We don't need to settle for a president who blames the other party for blocking his agenda when, of course, for the first 2 years of his presidency, he had a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate, and when, of course, he still has a Democratic Senate, and when, of course, he can't even point to the groundbreaking bills that supposedly have been blocked by Congress. In fact, I would argue that the legislative record of corporate bailouts, think about that, right? Individual citizens are in misery, and we're getting corporate bailouts of privately held, well, put it this way, shareholder-held entities like GM, who still, even after the bailout, are upside down and are on the verge of bankruptcy. Let me just say, too, that it should go without saying that part of the job of president is to be able to work with the other party. If you don't have the skill set to work with the other party, when the government literally has $16 trillion worth of red ink, if that doesn't create the kind of urgency where you can lead and get results, reach compromises and get results, then you don't have the skill set to be a great president. Let me point out, too, that we don't need to settle for a president who presides over a record number of students having problems with student loans, which are not dischargeable in bankruptcy, where the only solution the president can come up with in a system that's structurally flawed is to try to argue that the students should get more loans. Right? This is like giving the upside down homeowner more debt, which, by the way, is what a loan modification is, right? Getting back to student loans, understand that student loans used to be dischargeable in bankruptcy, and that's an important curb that needs to be in the system because the banks need to be held accountable. If a bank is giving a 17 or 18-year-old tens of thousands of dollars, then the status quo should make that transaction risky for the bank. There should be some inherent risk. If you don't have risk for the banks, then their incentive is to continue to give 17 and 18-year-olds tens of thousands of dollars. And then, of course, it's going to make our entire economic system more fragile when that 18-year-old then becomes 21 and, like many of these students right now, finds themselves with more than $100,000 worth of debt that they cannot pay back. Understand, that's a financial life sentence. You can't discharge the debt. Unlike a homeowner with a mortgage, you don't have the house to live in, right? In other words, you can't even walk away from the transaction and just have the bank take your house because your debt is unsecured, right? It's a personal debt. We're getting no leadership on this issue, and it's a huge issue. The amount of student loan debt is huge. It exceeds the amount of all credit card debt in the United States. So here's what I expect. I expect another dog and pony show of a major party convention, right? I'm sure everyone is going to look good wearing their suits, wearing their convention outfits, wearing their black dresses. I'm sure everyone is going to look great at the Democratic convention. But unless we figure out a way to actually get a budget passed that we can live within, unless we figure out a way to actually protect American civil liberties that our parents had and their parents had, unless we can undo idiotic concepts like the indefinite detention of American citizens in a free country, or government mandates of Americans in a free country, unless we can undo idiotic recent legislation that's been passed by this administration and the prior administration, then quite frankly, our American way of life remains in jeopardy. Let me know what you think. Leave your comments for me here online. Visit us at keepingitfree.blogspot.com. For the record, I'm a Gary Johnson supporter. Let me just say it is astounding, quite frankly, to see the two major parties really unable to address civil liberties, immigration, the budget in any meaningful manner whatsoever. Let me hear from you. Thanks for watching.